What if the person you loved most in the world kept a secret so profound it could shatter your kingdom? King Edmund thought he knew everything about his beloved Queen Eleanor, until the day he visited her tomb with flowers and found a small barefoot boy kneeling there, clutching a sealed letter bearing the royal insignia. "She told me to wait for you," the child whispers, tears streaming down his dirt-smudged face. "She said you would come today." As the king breaks the seal on his dead wife's final message, he discovers 6 haunting words that will forever change his life. Protect him as if he were your own. But before he can question the mysterious child further, the boy disappears behind the Queen's monument, revealing a hidden passage that shouldn't exist, one that leads to buried truths, deadly conspiracies, and a choice that will determine not just the future of a throne, but the soul of a kingdom. O Menino e a Carta. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the castle grounds as King Edmund made his solemn journey through the royal gardens. His shoulders, though draped in fine velvet and adorned with golden threads that caught the dying light, seemed to bear the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. In his trembling hands he carried a bouquet of white lilies, the Queen's favorite, their petals still glistening with morning dew preserved by the castle's gardeners, especially for this ritual. 6 years had passed since Queen Eleanor's death, yet the pain remained as fresh as an open wound. The path to her tomb was one the king knew by heart, each step worn into his memory like the smooth stones beneath his feet. Guards and servants lowered their eyes as he passed, knowing better than to interrupt his private mourning. The royal cemetery lay beyond an archway of ancient yew trees, their branches forming a natural cathedral over the final resting place of generations of monarchs. As King Edmund approached the white marble tomb that stood apart from the others, elegant in its simplicity as Eleanor herself had been, he stopped abruptly, his breath catching in his throat. There, kneeling before his wife's grave, was a small boy. The child couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years of age, with thin shoulders and bare feet caked with the mud of common roads. His clothes were threadbare but clean, as if someone had attempted to make him presentable despite their poverty. But what froze the king's blood wasn't merely the unexpected presence of a child in this sacred guarded place. It was what the boy clutched in his small hands, a letter bearing the unmistakable royal seal of Queen Eleanor herself. "Who dares?" the king began, but the words died on his lips as the child turned. Tears streaked the boy's dirt-smudged face, creating pale rivulets down his cheeks. His eyes, wide with both fear and recognition, held a strange familiarity that struck the king like a physical blow. Something in those eyes, their unusual shade of amber flecked with gold, stirred memories the king had buried alongside his beloved. The cemetery's silence became deafening. Even the birds seemed to hold their songs in anticipation. King Edmund felt the world shift beneath his feet, a terrible certainty taking root in his heart that this moment would forever divide his life into before and after. "She told me to wait for you," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible, yet somehow filling the space between them like thunder. "She said you would come today." The king's knees weakened. He lowered himself to the ground before the child, the royal protocol forgotten. The bouquet of lilies fell from his grasp, scattering across the stone path like abandoned promises. "Who are you?" King Edmund asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How do you know my wife?" The boy's gaze dropped to the sealed letter in his hands. "She gave me this, said I must place it in no hands but yours." His small fingers extended the parchment, the royal wax seal intact and bearing Eleanor's personal insignia, a nightingale in flight. With hands suddenly heavy as lead, the king took the letter. The parchment felt warm, as if it somehow retained the touch of his wife's hand. The gold rings on his fingers, symbols of his power and wealth, suddenly seemed meaningless against the weight of this simple, folded paper. "She made me promise to wait," the boy continued, his voice steadier now. "I've been here since dawn. The guards didn't see me come in." A chill ran through the king's body despite the warm evening air. How had a child breached the castle's defenses? What message from beyond the grave was so important that Eleanor had entrusted it to this mysterious boy? With trembling fingers, the king broke the seal. The crack of the wax echoed in the stillness, like the breaking of chains long carried. Inside was a single sheet of parchment bearing his wife's elegant handwriting, a script he would recognize among thousands. Few words were written there, but they were enough to shatter the foundations of his world. Protect him as if he were your own. He carries the secret of my soul. The king's breath stopped. His eyes darted from the letter to the boy, searching his features with new intensity. The child stood perfectly still, a living ghost at the edge of a grave, waiting for judgment or salvation. "What secret?" the king demanded, his voice barely controlled. "What did she tell you?" The boy's eyes darted nervously to the shadows lengthening around them. "Not here," he whispered. "She said it wasn't safe to speak in the open." Before the king could question him further, the boy backed away, moving with the quick, nervous energy of one accustomed to fleeing. King Edmund rose to follow, his royal dignity forgotten in the desperate need to know what final message his queen had left him. "Wait!" he called, but the child had already turned, darting between the ancient tombstones with the sure-footed knowledge of one who had studied this path. The king pursued him, his heavy robes hampering his movements, as he watched the small figure disappear behind his wife's monument. When the king rounded the corner of the marble tomb, expecting to find the cemetery's wall, he stopped in disbelief. There, where solid stone should have been, a narrow passage gaped open, a secret door built into the very foundation of Eleanor's resting place. A doorway he, the king himself, had never known existed. The boy stood at its threshold, one foot already swallowed by shadow. "She said you would follow," he murmured, "if you truly loved her." Then he vanished into the darkness, leaving the king staring at a passage that shouldn't exist, leading to secrets he never knew his wife had kept. O segredo da passagem. For a moment, King Edmund hesitated at the threshold of the hidden passage, his mind reeling with questions that had no answers. The fading daylight behind him cast his elongated shadow into the darkness ahead, stretching toward the vanished boy like a desperate hand reaching for truth. In all his years as monarch, in all the intimate moments shared with Eleanor, how had she kept such a secret from him? With shaking hands, the king pulled a torch from its bracket near the cemetery entrance and thrust it into the passage. The flame sputtered against the damp air, casting wild shadows that danced along ancient stonework slick with moisture. The scent of earth, decay, and forgotten time assaulted his senses. This was no hastily constructed tunnel. These stones had been placed generations ago, perhaps by ancestors who understood the value of hidden roots beneath a castle perpetually entangled in political intrigue. "Boy," the king called, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. No answer came but the distant patter of small feet on stone. Drawing a deep breath that tasted of centuries-old dust, King Edmund ducked beneath the low archway and entered the passage. The torch flame trembled with each step, sending shadows leaping across walls that wept with condensation. Every breath felt heavy in his lungs, laden with the weight of secrets long buried. The boy remained just ahead, a fleeting shadow always turning the next corner, his bare feet making almost no sound against the cold stone floor. Unlike the king, whose ceremonial robes caught on rough edges and whose jeweled crown scraped against the low ceiling, the child moved through this hidden world with the ease of one returning home. "Stop," the king commanded, his royal authority echoing hollowly in this place where crowns held no power. "I demand you tell me what you know." The flame of his torch wavered precariously, nearly extinguished by the movement of air through the passageway. In that moment of near darkness, fear gripped the king's heart. Not the strategic concern of a ruler, but the primal terror of a man confronting the unknown. What if this was a trap? What if enemies of the crown had used a child to lure him into this labyrinth? Yet something deeper than fear drove him forward. The memory of Eleanor's handwriting, the familiarity in the boy's eyes. These things pulled him onward with a force stronger than caution. The king quickened his pace, the sound of his ornate boots against stone creating a desperate rhythm that matched his pounding heart. After what seemed like an eternity of twisting passages, the tunnel widened into a small chamber carved from the bedrock beneath the castle. The king's torch illuminated what could only be described as a shrine to memory. Here, in this hidden sanctuary, lay personal treasures of the queen. a delicately embroidered veil she had worn on their wedding day, its once white fabric now yellowed with age, a small medallion containing a miniature portrait of her face, captured in the bloom of youth by a court painter's careful brush, and most telling of all, a worn leather-bound diary resting upon a simple stone altar. The king stood transfixed, his breath visible in the cool air. This hidden chamber held more of Eleanor's essence than the grand marble tomb above. This was where her secrets lived. The boy stood beside the altar, his small frame dwarfed by the stone construction. In the flickering torchlight, his features seemed to shift, sometimes resembling Eleanor, sometimes reflecting something altogether unknown. "She came here often," the boy said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice echoed differently here, stronger in this chamber of secrets. "To write in her book and to cry where no one could see." The revelation struck King Edmund like a physical blow. The queen, his Eleanor, had wept in this hidden place rather than share her burdens with him. What pain had she carried alone? What sorrows had she concealed behind her gentle smile? "How did you know her?" the king demanded, stepping closer to the altar. "Why would she entrust a child with such secrets?" The boy's fingers traced the edge of the diary with familiar ease. "She said I was the only one who could understand, the only one who would remember." Confusion and jealousy warred in the king's heart. This child, this commoner, claimed a connection to Eleanor that he, her husband and king, had never known existed. The torch in his hand trembled with the force of his emotions. "Open it," the king commanded, gesturing to the diary. "Show me what she wrote." The boy's hand withdrew from the book as if burned. "I cannot. It's locked," and she kept the key elsewhere. King Edmund lunged forward, seizing the diary from the altar. True to the boy's word, an intricate iron lock bound the covers together, its mechanism far too complex to be forced without destroying the contents within. Frustration boiled in his veins as he turned the object over in his hands, searching for any weakness in its construction. "Who are you?" the king asked again, his voice lower now, dangerous with desperation. "What were you to my wife?" The boy opened his mouth to answer, but his attention suddenly shifted to the passage behind the king. His eyes widened with unmistakable fear. "Someone comes," he whispered, shrinking back against the altar. The king whirled around, raising his torch toward the tunnel entrance. The sound reached him then, careful footsteps approaching with measured precision, not the clumsy rush of guards searching for their missing monarch. Whoever followed had known exactly where to find this hidden chamber. King Edmund instinctively moved in front of the boy, one hand reaching for the ceremonial dagger at his belt. Despite his confusion and suspicion, something protective stirred within him, a response to the fear in the child's eyes and the plea in Eleanor's letter. "Protect him as if he were your own." The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the glow of approaching light. The king held his breath, positioning himself between the entrance and the boy, the diary clutched against his chest like a shield. From the darkness of the passage emerged an arm holding a silver lantern, its light falling across a face the king knew all too well, the weathered features of Lord Athelred, his oldest advisor and confidant, a man who had served the crown since before Edmund took the throne. The king's relief lasted only a moment before transforming into fresh suspicion. How did Athelred know of this place? How had he known to follow? And most troubling of all, what connection did his trusted advisor have to the secrets Eleanor had taken to her grave? The boy gasped softly behind him, and in that small sound, King Edmund heard confirmation of his worst fears. The appearance of Lord Athelred in this hidden sanctuary was no coincidence. It was another piece of a puzzle that grew more disturbing with each revelation. "O Conselheiro nas Sombras." Lord Athelred froze at the entrance to the chamber, his weathered face caught in the conflicting lights of his silver lantern and the king's guttering torch. For a man renowned for his composure in royal councils, the advisor's expression betrayed unusual alarm. Eyes widened slightly, lips parted in what might have been surprise or dismay. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice echoing against the ancient stones. "This is not what it appears." King Edmund stood his ground, one hand still protectively extended toward the boy, the other clutching Eleanor's diary against his chest. The familiar voice of his most trusted counselor now rang with unfamiliar notes of deception. In this hidden chamber, every certainty seemed to crumble like the moisture-weakened mortar between the stones. "And what does it appear to be, Lord Athelred?" the king asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "That my wife kept secrets in chambers beneath her tomb? That a child I've never seen carries her letters? Or perhaps that my own advisor knows pathways in my castle that I do not?" Athelred stepped fully into the chamber, his lantern casting his shadow enormous against the far wall. The man was past 60 winters, his back slightly stooped with age, yet he moved with the deliberate grace of one who had navigated both battlefield and court intrigue with equal skill. "I served the queen before I served you, sire," Athelred said, his tone carefully measured. "There are matters of conscience that even a queen cannot share with her king." The boy edged further behind the stone altar, his small fingers gripping the edge until his knuckles whitened. His eyes never left Athelred's face, not with the fear one might expect from a child confronting a stranger, but with the wary recognition of one who has encountered an adversary before. "You knew of this place," the king said. It was not a question. Athelred nodded slowly, his gaze moving deliberately around the chamber as if assessing what the king had already discovered. "I helped Her Majesty establish this sanctuary many years ago, when she first realized the need for discretion." "Discretion," the king repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "Is that what we call secrets kept from the crown?" The advisor sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly beneath his formal robes. "There were meetings here, Your Majesty. Late at night, when the castle slept. The queen would come alone, through passages few remember exist. Each word struck the king like a physical blow. Meetings in secret. His Eleanor, slipping through hidden corridors while he slept unaware in their royal chambers. The implications twisted in his gut like a knife. Had his queen betrayed him? Had his most trusted advisor facilitated that betrayal? "What kind of meetings?" the king demanded, unable to keep the raw edge of jealousy from his voice. Athelred's eyes flicked briefly to the boy, then back to the king. "Meetings of necessity, Your Majesty. The queen made promises that required delicate handling." Promises. The word echoed in the king's mind, alongside Eleanor's written plea. "Protect him as if he were your own." A terrible suspicion began to form, one that questioned not just his wife's fidelity, but the very foundations of his reign. "Who is this child?" King Edmund asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Tell me the truth, Athelred. Was he born of those meetings of necessity?" The advisor's face paled visibly, even in the dim light. "Sire, I swore oaths to the queen that I would—" "Your oaths to the crown supersede all others," the king interrupted, his patience shattering. "I command you to speak plainly." The boy flinched at the king's tone, shrinking further into the shadows. Athelred's expression hardened into the diplomatic mask the king had seen him wear during the most difficult negotiations with foreign powers. "The queen's actions were always in service to the realm, Your Majesty," Athelred said carefully. "She carried burdens you could not share, not without compromising your position." "My position?" the king echoed incredulously. "I am the sovereign. What position could be compromised by truth?" Athelred stepped closer, his voice lowering to ensure his words would not carry beyond the chamber. "Even kings must sometimes remain ignorant of certain matters, sire, for the good of all. The queen understood this. She acted as your shield." The torch in the king's hand sputtered dangerously, threatening to plunge them into darkness, save for Athelred's lantern. In that moment of wavering light, the king saw something in his advisor's eyes that he had never noticed before. Not treachery exactly, but a calculation that excluded him from its reckoning. The boy moved suddenly, his attention drawn to the diary in the king's grasp. "She said you would understand once you read her words," he whispered. "She said your heart would know the truth, even if your crown could not." Before either man could respond, a loud crash broke the tense silence. The diary had slipped from the king's fingers, striking the stone floor with enough force that its ancient lock sprung open. Loose pages, tucked between the bound sheets, spilled across the damp stones like fallen leaves. All three lunged for the scattered papers, the king driven by desperate need for answers, Athelred by what appeared to be alarm, and the boy by some unspoken obligation to his mysterious benefactress. King Edmund seized one of the fallen sheets, recognizing immediately the elegant script of his wife. The parchment trembled in his hand as he read words never meant for public eyes. The pact is sealed with blood and oath. The boy must remain hidden until the time is right, or all we have built will crumble. If he grows without protection, the crown will fall into the wrong hands. The king looked up sharply, his gaze moving from the mysterious child to his suddenly suspicious advisor. "What pact?" he demanded. "What have you and my wife been plotting in these shadows?" Athelred straightened, something shifting in his demeanor. The deference of an advisor giving way to the resolve of a man with his own mission. "Not plotting, Your Majesty. Preserving. There are forces at work in your court that would destroy everything if they knew this child existed." The boy gathered the remaining papers with quick, practiced movements, as if he had handled the Queen's private writings before. His eyes, when they met the king's, held a wisdom far beyond his years, and something else that struck Edmund to his core, the same unwavering resolve he had so often seen in Eleanor's gaze. "She told me you would protect me," the boy said simply. "She said that when you knew the truth, you would understand why she kept me secret, even from you." The king felt the ground shifting beneath him, not physically, but in the way one's world changes when fundamental truths are suddenly questioned. Who was this child that Eleanor had protected so desperately? What threat could be so grave that his own wife would keep such secrets? As if in answer to his unspoken questions, the boy held out one of the fallen pages, his small hand steady despite the weight of its contents. "Read it," he urged. "Read what she feared most. O peso da promesa." King Edmund's hands trembled as he accepted the page from the boy. The parchment felt unnaturally heavy, as if the weight of its secrets could be measured in physical form. His eyes scanned Eleanor's familiar handwriting, the gentle curves of her script, the way she pressed harder on certain letters, habits he had observed countless times in royal decrees and personal correspondence. Yet these words were different, written with an urgency that seemed to leap from the page. If he grows without protection, the crown will fall into wrong hands. They watch from the shadows of the court, waiting for any sign of weakness. The child is both our greatest vulnerability and our only hope. Edmund must never know unless I am gone. His ignorance is his shield and the realm's protection. The king's mind reeled, struggling to piece together fragments of a puzzle whose full image remained obscured. The chamber's air grew thicker, heavier with each revelation. Who were these shadowy watchers Eleanor feared? What connection did this boy have to the succession of the crown? The implications were staggering, threatening to collapse the carefully constructed narrative of his reign, like a house of cards in a sudden gale. "Your Majesty," Athelred ventured, his voice cutting through the king's racing thoughts. "The Queen acted only to protect what you both hold dear." Edmund looked up from the page, fixing his advisor with a stare that had made foreign ambassadors quake. "And what exactly is that, Lord Athelred? What did my wife believe needed such protection that she would lie to her king?" The old advisor glanced meaningfully at the boy, then back to Edmund. "The future, sire, the true succession." A cold realization washed over the king. The boy. This wasn't about infidelity or secret trysts. This was about blood and birthright, the very foundation of monarchical power. The pieces began to align in his mind with terrible clarity. The Queen's desperate protection, the hidden passages, the documents preserved in secret. This wasn't merely a child. This was a living, breathing claim to something that could upend the kingdom. "She said you wouldn't abandon me." The boy suddenly spoke, his voice small yet clear in the oppressive silence of the crypt. "But everyone else tries to hide me away." The words sliced through the king's confusion like a blade. There was something in the child's tone, not accusation, but a resigned acceptance that cut deeper than any reproach could have. How many years had this boy lived in shadows? How many hands had moved him like a chess piece on a board whose rules he couldn't comprehend? King Edmund knelt before the child, bringing himself to eye level, a gesture no monarch would typically make, placing himself beneath another's gaze. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. A small scar above the boy's right eyebrow, the particular set of his jaw, the way his left eye held a fleck of darker color within its iris. Features that whispered of connections and bloodlines. "Who has been hiding you?" the king asked gently. The boy's eyes darted to Athelred, then back to the king. Different people, always moving in the night. Sometimes monks, sometimes servants. They never tell me why, only that it's for my protection. His small shoulders straightened with a dignity beyond his years. But she promised it wouldn't be forever. Athelred stepped forward, his shadow falling across both king and child. "Your Majesty, we must not linger here. These passages are known to few, but not to us alone. If others discover your absence—" "Others?" the king interrupted sharply. "Who exactly knows of this place, Athelred? Who else was part of my wife's secret council?" The advisor's weathered face tightened. "Those loyal to the true cause of the realm, sire. Those who understand what is at stake." Rage flared in Edmund's chest. Not merely the indignation of a deceived husband, but the fury of a sovereign whose authority had been circumvented within his own castle walls. A parallel court had existed alongside his own, making decisions, forming alliances, protecting secrets that could potentially shatter his reign. And his beloved Eleanor had been at its center. "The boy represents danger, not hope," Athelred continued, his tone shifting subtly. "He should be returned to those who can keep him safely hidden. Your knowledge of his existence puts everything at risk." Something in the advisor's voice triggered a warning in the king's mind. The concern seemed performative rather than genuine, a practiced speech rather than spontaneous counsel. For the first time, Edmund wondered if Athelred's loyalties might lie not with the crown he served, but with the secrets he kept. "I will decide what represents danger to my realm," the king said coldly, rising to his feet. "This boy comes with me to the castle, under my direct protection." Alarm flashed across Athelred's face. "Sire, I must strongly advise against—" "Your advice is noted, Lord Athelred." Edmund cut him off, royal authority hardening his voice. "But in this matter I will follow the explicit wishes of my queen." He placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "We leave now." The advisor's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into a mask of resigned acceptance. "As you wish, Your Majesty, but the upper passages would be safer than returning through the cemetery. Allow me to lead the way." Edmund gathered the fallen diary pages and secured them within his robes, unwilling to leave any part of Eleanor's secrets behind. With a nod to the boy, he gestured for Athelred to proceed with his lantern. The three figures moved in single file back into the narrow passage, the king deliberately positioning himself between the child and his suddenly suspect advisor. The journey through the dark corridors seemed longer than before, each twist and turn taking them deeper beneath the castle foundations rather than toward the upper levels Athelred had promised. The air grew damper, the walls closer, until they emerged into a wider tunnel that appeared to connect with the ancient catacomb system beneath the castle. "Where are you taking us, Athelred?" the king demanded, suspicion mounting with each step away from familiar territory. "A safer route, Your Majesty," the advisor replied without turning. "One less likely to be observed." The boy tugged at the king's sleeve, his expression troubled. "This isn't the way she showed me," he whispered. "We're going deeper." Edmund halted abruptly. "Enough, Athelred. We turn back now and take the direct path to the royal chambers." The advisor finally turned, his lantern casting sinister shadows across his features. "I'm afraid that's no longer possible, sire." A chill that had nothing to do with the underground dampness crept along the king's spine. "Explain yourself. There are those who would consider your discovery of the boy inconvenient," Athelred said carefully. "Preparations must be made before you can safely acknowledge him." The king's hand moved to the hilt of his ceremonial dagger. "You will take us back to the upper levels immediately, or I will have you arrested for treason the moment we emerge." Athelred sighed, a sound of genuine regret. "You see, Your Majesty, this is precisely why the Queen kept her secrets. Even now, you cannot grasp the complexity of what she protected." Before Edmund could respond, they reached a heavy iron door set into the stone wall. The advisor moved to open it, but as he turned the ancient mechanism, the king realized with sudden clarity that they had been led into a trap. This was no path to safety. It was a prison. "Run!" he shouted to the boy, shoving him back toward the passage they had just traversed. But as they turned, the devastating truth became apparent. The door behind them had been silently closed and barred, trapping them in this section of the catacombs. The king whirled back to face Athelred, fury and betrayal etched into every line of his face. "What have you done?" "What was necessary, sire," the advisor replied, his voice heavy with what might have been genuine sorrow. "As I have always done for the good of the realm." O Cerco Invisible. Darkness pressed in from all sides as King Edmund processed the full weight of their predicament. The iron door behind them, locked. The path ahead, a trap laid by his most trusted advisor. And between these two betrayals stood a child whose very existence had been hidden from him by his beloved queen. The bitter taste of betrayal filled his mouth, sharper than any poison ever feared at court banquets. "You will explain yourself, Athelred," the king commanded, his voice echoing against the damp stone walls. Despite their dire situation, royal authority still resonated in his tone, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Who orchestrated this treachery?" The elderly advisor lowered his lantern slightly, casting his own face in shadow while illuminating the king and boy. It was a subtle shift of power. Athelred could see them clearly, while they struggled to read his expression. "Treachery is a matter of perspective, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice carrying the weariness of a man who had witnessed too many court intrigues. "What you call betrayal, others might call preservation." The boy pressed himself against the wall, his breathing quick and shallow. His eyes darted between the two men, calculating in a way no child should ever need to be. King Edmund noted how the boy's hand slipped inside his threadbare tunic, perhaps searching for a hidden weapon or talisman. "Whose preservation?" the king demanded. "Certainly not mine, nor that of this child, if your intention is to leave us imprisoned in these catacombs." A drop of water fell from the ceiling, striking the stone floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Another followed, and another, a steady rhythm like the ticking of an executioner's clock. "I serve the crown, sire," Athelred said carefully, "not merely the man who wears it." The implications of those words hung in the air between them. The advisor was admitting to a loyalty that transcended personal fealty, a dedication to an abstract ideal that could justify even the betrayal of his king. Such thinking was the most dangerous kind of treason, for it came clothed in the guise of righteousness. The king's hand moved to his dagger once more, but he hesitated. Violence against an unarmed old man, whatever his crimes, was not the action of a just ruler. Moreover, Athelred likely held the key to their escape, both literally and figuratively. "The queen trusted you," Edmund said, changing tactics. "She made you guardian of her secrets. Would you now betray her final wishes as well? She explicitly asked that I protect this boy." Something flickered across Athelred's features, a moment of genuine conflict. Her Majesty did not anticipate certain developments at court. The situation has changed since her instructions were written. The boy suddenly pushed away from the wall, his voice surprisingly steady. "You promised her," he accused the advisor. "You swore on your family's honor that you would help me reach the king when the time came." Athelred's composure cracked slightly. "And I have brought you to him, have I not? But timing is everything in matters of succession. The court is not yet ready for what you represent." The king looked sharply at the boy, then back to his advisor. "Succession," he repeated, the word hanging heavy in the dank air. "Speak plainly, Athelred. Who is this child to the crown?" Before the advisor could answer, the boy lunged forward, his small hand pointing to a narrow crevice in the wall near the floor, barely visible in the shadowy light. "There," he whispered urgently to the king. "She showed me once. A second way out." Athelred moved quickly for a man of his years, raising his lantern higher. "Your Majesty, you must not." But the king had already dropped to one knee, examining the opening. It was indeed a passage, narrow and clearly designed for emergencies rather than comfort. Too small for most adults, but perhaps just wide enough for a desperate man to squeeze through, and certainly adequate for a child. How do you know of this? Edmund demanded of the boy. She brought me here 3 times. The child replied, his eyes never leaving Athelred. She said if anyone ever tried to use these tunnels against me, I should remember the rat's path. A look of genuine surprise crossed the advisor's face. Impossible, he muttered. The queen couldn't have known about your potential treachery. The king finished coldly. Perhaps she knew you better than you realized, Lord Athelred. Without waiting for a response, Edmund turned to the boy. You first, he instructed, gesturing to the narrow opening. I'll be directly behind you. The child needed no further encouragement. With the fluid movements of one accustomed to tight spaces, he dropped to his stomach and began to wriggle through the crevice. The king prepared to follow, but paused to address his former advisor one last time. When I return to the castle, your position is forfeit, he stated with deadly calm. Consider yourself fortunate if treason charges are not pursued. Athelred made no move to stop them, his expression unreadable in the lantern's glow. You still do not understand what forces you confront, sire. The Queen's protection extended beyond the grave because the threat to the realm extends beyond your knowledge. Then enlighten me, Edmund challenged. That is precisely what I was attempting to do, the advisor replied, by removing you from the castle's eyes and ears. There are those in your court who would kill the boy on sight, and you as well, should you acknowledge him. A chill ran down the king's spine, but he refused to show weakness. I am not so easily killed, Lord Athelred. Your father thought the same, came the quiet reply. The king stiffened. His father's death, officially attributed to fever, had occurred when Edmund was just 16, thrusting him onto the throne before many felt he was ready. That Athelred would invoke it now, in this context, opened questions too disturbing to contemplate. With a final hard look at the man who had counseled him for 2 decades, Edmund lowered himself to the ground and began the difficult process of squeezing through the narrow passage. The rough stone scraped against his fine clothing, tearing fabric and skin alike. The ceremonial crown he wore for his visit to Eleanor's tomb caught against the low ceiling, forcing him to remove it and push it ahead of him through the cramped space. The passageway seemed endless, a tight, suffocating crawl through what felt like the very bones of the castle. The only reassurance was the occasional sound of the boy's movement ahead, proof that the path led somewhere rather than to a dead end. After what seemed like an eternity of claustrophobic struggle, the king felt a draft of fresher air. The passage widened slightly, allowing him to move more quickly. Finally, he emerged into a larger chamber, where the boy waited with wide, watchful eyes. Where are we? Edmund asked, brushing dirt and cobwebs from his once regal attire. The forgotten places, the boy answered cryptically. Below the old chapel, I think. She never told me all the names. The king retrieved his battered crown, now dented and dulled with grime. It seemed a fitting metaphor for his monarchy, the dignified surface revealed as fragile and easily tarnished. He surveyed their new surroundings, seeking a way back to the upper levels of the castle. Before he could locate an exit, the sound of soft footfalls reached them. The king instinctively pushed the boy behind him, drawing his dagger in one fluid motion. But what emerged from the shadows was not Athelred or castle guards. Instead, a procession of robed figures moved into view, their faces obscured by deep hoods, their hands carrying simple oil lamps that cast a golden glow throughout the chamber. Monks, at least a dozen of them, arranged in a semicircle that effectively blocked any escape route. At their center stood an elderly brother whose stooped posture spoke of decades of prayer and service. In his gnarled hands he held something that caught the light and drew the king's eye immediately, a small iron key, ornately crafted and unmistakably ancient. The boy gasped softly, his hand clutching at the king's torn sleeve. "That's her key," he whispered, "the one that opens the diary." The aged monk stepped forward, his movements deliberate and unhurried. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of one accustomed to being heard without needing to raise his tone. "Your Majesty," he intoned, extending the key toward Edmund. "The time has come for you to know who this child truly is. O legado escondido." King Edmund's fingers closed around the ornate key, its metal cold against his skin despite the monk's warm grasp. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, as if it carried not just the means to unlock a diary, but the burden of revelations that might forever alter his reign. His gaze shifted between the assembled monks and the mysterious boy, searching for some indication of what truth awaited him. "Who are you?" he demanded of the elderly monk. "How do you come to possess my wife's key?" The old man lowered his hood, revealing a face mapped with the deep lines of a life devoted to contemplation. His eyes, however, held a sharpness that belied his frail appearance, the gaze of one who had witnessed more of the world than his cloistered existence might suggest. "I am Brother Ambrose," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong, "confessor to Queen Eleanor for the last 17 years of her life." The king's brow furrowed. Eleanor had always attended services at the royal chapel, led by clerics appointed by the crown. The idea that she had sought spiritual guidance elsewhere, in secret, was yet another revelation in a day filled with uncomfortable discoveries. My wife had her own personal confessor, without my knowledge. Brother Ambrose's expression remained serene, untouched by the king's growing indignation. "The queen sought us out after the northern campaign, Your Majesty. She came to our monastery wounded in spirit, though not in body." The northern campaign. Edmund's mind raced back 12 years, to the brutal suppression of a rebellion in the outlying provinces. He had returned victorious but changed. The first time he had led troops in actual combat. The first time he had seen the true cost of maintaining a crown. Eleanor had seemed distant afterward, but he had attributed it to his own transformation, not hers. "The queen witnessed much during those troubled times," Brother Ambrose continued. "Things that opened her eyes to suffering she had never before contemplated." The boy shifted uncomfortably beside the king, drawing the monk's collective gaze. Several made subtle gestures, touches to heart or forehead, that might have been blessings or signs of recognition. "She brought the child to us first," one of the younger monks added, stepping forward slightly. "On a winter night so bitter the ink froze in our writing room. She was half dead from the journey, but the boy had not a mark upon him." King Edmund looked down at the child with new eyes. If the monk spoke truth, this boy had been under Eleanor's protection for years, possibly since infancy. The implications were staggering. "You claim my wife sought refuge among you," the king said carefully. "That she brought secrets to your monastery, rather than to her husband. Why should I believe this isn't some elaborate deception?" Brother Ambrose gestured to the diary. "Her own words will confirm our account, Your Majesty." The queen recorded everything, her observations, her fears, her hopes for the future. She knew this day would come. With hands that betrayed the slightest tremor, Edmund withdrew the diary from within his torn robes. The scattered pages he had gathered in the hidden chamber had been hastily tucked between its covers. He inserted the key into the lock, feeling the mechanism shift and release with a soft click that echoed in the silence of the underground chamber. The binding creaked as he opened it, revealing page after page filled with Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Dates marked the entries, stretching back more than a decade. His eyes caught fragments as he turned the pages. "Witnessed the burning of the village today. Edmund says it was necessary, that the rebellion must be crushed completely to prevent future uprisings. But the screams of children haunt my dreams. Found the boy half-starved in the ruins. His mother dead beside him, clutching him even in death. No one claimed him. No one seemed to care. How many more are there like him, victims of policies signed with golden seals in comfortable chambers? Cannot tell Edmund. He bears enough guilt beneath the crown. But I have made my decision. This child will be my penance, my secret mission. One life saved among so many lost." The king looked up from the diary, his face ashen. "She blamed me for the suffering of the common folk." "Not blamed, Your Majesty," Brother Ambrose corrected gently. "She understood the burden of rule, but she also saw what you could not, the faces of those affected by royal decrees, the hungry children, the displaced families, the widows created by wars deemed necessary for the realm." Another monk stepped forward, his cowl falling back to reveal a younger face marked by a distinctive scar. "The queen became our bridge between palace and people. She brought news of suffering that would never reach the throne room. She funded our work with the poor and displaced, all in secret, to protect your position." Edmund's mind reeled. While he had ruled from the castle, concerned with treaties and borders and succession, Eleanor had created her own shadow court, one concerned not with power but with alleviating the suffering that power often caused. She had seen what he had been trained from birth to overlook, the human cost of governance. "And the boy?" he asked, his voice hollow. "What is his role in this hidden mission of hers?" The child himself answered, his small voice steady in the echoing chamber. "I am her promise. She saved me to remind you." "Remind me of what?" The question came out harsher than intended, the king's emotions raw from revelation upon revelation. Brother Ambrose placed a weathered hand on the boy's shoulder. The queen believed that rulers too easily forget what they cannot see. "She saved this child as a living reminder of your responsibility to those without titles or lands, the common folk who bear the weight of royal decisions." The king turned back to the diary, finding an entry marked with a ribbon. "He grows stronger each day. Sometimes I see in him the future I pray for, a kingdom where mercy tempers justice, where the throne remembers its duty to the weakest subjects. Edmund has a good heart beneath the crown's weight. When the time comes, this child must reach him. He will be the voice I could not raise in life." Tears pricked at the king's eyes, not just for the wife he had lost, but for the woman he had never fully known. While he had mourned her physical absence, he had been ignorant of the depth of her compassion, the scope of her secret work. "Your Majesty," Brother Ambrose said, his tone grave. The queen's concerns went beyond charity. "In her final years, she uncovered troubling alliances within your court. Nobles who see the common people as tools, rather than subjects deserving protection." Another monk nodded solemnly. She feared these factions would move against any attempt to improve the conditions of the poor. That is why the boy has been kept hidden. He represents everything they oppose. A living symbol. The king murmured, understanding dawning. "More than that," Brother Ambrose replied. "He carries her testimony." "The child has memorized names, dates, observed meetings that implicate powerful members of your council in schemes that would horrify you. He can identify those who place their own interests above the realm's." The boy straightened under the king's gaze, a fierce determination visible in his young face. "I remember everything," he stated simply. "She made sure I would never forget." King Edmund felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp underground air. If what they claimed was true, this child was not merely a charitable project of his late wife. He was a weapon aimed at the heart of corruption within his own court. No wonder there were those who would see him silenced. "There is more," one of the monks said, stepping forward with a rolled parchment. "The queen left instructions for today. She knew that once you discovered the boy, events would move quickly. Those who have been watching him will realize their schemes are in danger." The king accepted the scroll, breaking the familiar seal with a sense of both dread and anticipation. Eleanor's final commands to him, written from beyond the grave. As he read, his expression hardened from grief to resolve. "According to this, there are traitors in my council planning to move against me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And Lord Athelred stands at a crossroads," Brother Ambrose finished. "He has served two masters for years, your crown and his conscience." The queen believed he could still choose rightly, given the chance. Edmund thought of the advisor who had led them into the trap, yet who had made no move to harm them directly. Perhaps there was more to Athelred's actions than simple betrayal. "Your Majesty," the elderly monk said urgently, "we cannot linger here. The queen's letter speaks truth. Once the boy's existence is known, those she identified will move quickly to eliminate both him and anyone who protects him." The king nodded, decision crystallizing. "Then we return to the castle immediately. It's time I learned exactly who serves the crown, and who merely exploits it." As the monks led them toward a hidden exit, the boy tugged at Edmund's tattered sleeve. "She said you would understand," he whispered. "She said your heart would know what to do." The king placed a hand on the child's shoulder, feeling a protective instinct rise within him, not because of any blood connection, but because this boy represented Eleanor's final wish. her lasting legacy. "What is your name, child?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, meeting the king's gaze without fear. "She called me Thomas, your majesty, but she said someday I might have another name." The implication hung in the air between them as the monks opened a concealed door leading upward toward the castle proper. A Escolha do Coração. The ascent from the monastery's hidden chambers to the castle proper was made in tense silence. King Edmund led the way, his once immaculate robes now torn and soiled, his crown carried rather than worn, a physical manifestation of how the day's revelations had stripped away his royal certainties. Behind him walked Thomas, the mysterious boy whose existence had remained Eleanor's most closely guarded secret. The child moved with unusual composure, his bare feet making almost no sound on the stone steps, his eyes constantly alert to their surroundings. Brother Ambrose and 2 younger monks accompanied them, while the others remained below, returning to whatever clandestine work they performed in service to the late queen's vision. The elderly monk had insisted on coming, claiming that the king would need a witness untainted by court politics when confronting what awaited above. As they neared the upper levels, the distant sounds of the castle filtered down to them. Servants calling to one another, the clatter of kitchenware, the occasional burst of laughter from the guards' quarters. The ordinary rhythm of palace life continued, oblivious to the earthquake of revelations occurring beneath its foundations. "We emerged near the royal chapel," Brother Ambrose whispered as they reached a final landing. "The queen ensured this passage remained unknown to all but a trusted few. Even I did not know of it," Edmund replied, a lingering bitterness in his tone. The monk's weathered face showed compassion. "She protected you as much as the boy, your majesty. Knowledge can be a dangerous burden for those who sit on thrones." A hidden mechanism released the secret door, revealing a small antechamber behind the chapel altar. The king paused before stepping into the open, turning to study Thomas in the better light that streamed through stained glass windows. For the first time, he fully registered the child's features, the determined set of his jaw, the thoughtful intelligence in his eyes, the way he held himself with dignity despite his ragged appearance. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, though Edmund could not place the resemblance. "Are you afraid?" the king asked softly. Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "She told me this day would come, that I should be brave, like she was." A lump formed in Edmund's throat. Even now, Eleanor's presence seemed to surround them, guiding their steps from beyond death's veil. He placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder, an awkward gesture of reassurance from a man unaccustomed to comforting children, then led the small party out into the chapel proper. The corridors beyond were mercifully empty, allowing them to move swiftly toward the royal apartments. The king needed time to think, to plan his next move before confronting the vipers Eleanor had identified in her diary. Yet fate granted him no such luxury. As they rounded the corner toward his private chambers, they encountered a court page who nearly dropped the scrolls he carried at the sight of his monarch in such disarray. Your Majesty," the young man stammered, eyes widening further as he took in the monks and the ragged child. "The council has been searching for you since midday. Lord Chancellor Beaumont has called an emergency session in the throne room." Edmund's eyes narrowed. Lord Beaumont had no authority to convene the council without royal approval, unless they were invoking ancient protocols for a missing or incapacitated monarch. How convenient that such a session would be called on the very day he discovered Eleanor's secrets. "Tell them I will attend shortly," he commanded, his voice regaining its royal timbre despite his disheveled appearance. As the page hurried away, Brother Ambrose leaned closer. "Beaumont is among those named in the Queen's writings," he murmured, "a principal architect of the policies that impoverished the northern provinces." The king nodded grimly. "Then it seems we have arrived at precisely the right moment." He turned to Thomas, who watched this exchange with keen attention. "Stay close to me. Say nothing unless I ask you directly." They proceeded directly to the throne room, forgoing any attempt to restore the king's appearance. Let them see him thus, Edmund thought, stripped of ceremonial polish, carrying the grime of secret passages and buried truths. Perhaps it was fitting that he should confront his council in such a state. The great doors of the throne room opened before them, revealing a tableau that confirmed Edmund's worst suspicions. The full council was assembled, along with additional nobles whose presence at such a meeting was highly irregular. At the center stood Lord Chancellor Beaumont, a document unfurled in his hands. Lord Athelred was notably absent. All conversation ceased as the king entered with his unusual entourage. Shock registered on face after face, first at Edmund's disheveled state, then at the presence of monks within the palace walls, and finally, with growing alarm, at the sight of Thomas walking boldly at the king's side. "Your Majesty," Beaumont recovered first, hastily rolling the document in his hands. "We feared some misfortune had befallen you, when you could not be found for evening council. Spare me your concerns, Lord Chancellor." Edmund cut him off, striding directly to the throne. He did not sit, however, but stood before it, positioning Thomas at his right hand. "I find it curious that in my brief absence, you saw fit to assemble not just the council, but half the northern barons as well." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Several exchanged glances that confirmed everything Eleanor had written. Conspiracies formed in whispers, alliances forged in shadows. "Merely prudence, sire," Beaumont replied smoothly. "Given recent disturbances in the provinces—" "Disturbances you helped create," Edmund interrupted, his voice like steel. "Through taxation policies that starve the very people who feed this kingdom." Beaumont's composure slipped momentarily, his eyes darting to the other councillors. "Your Majesty has been gravely misinformed. Perhaps these monks have filled your ear with peasant complaints that—" "My wife filled my ear," the king declared, his words echoing in the suddenly silent chamber. "From beyond her grave, Queen Eleanor has revealed what you and your allies have hidden from the crown." He held up Eleanor's diary for all to see. Years of observations, meticulously recorded. Evidence of how certain members of this council have systematically undermined royal policies meant to protect the vulnerable, how you've diverted funds intended for drought relief, manipulated grain prices during famine, silenced those who spoke against you. The chamber erupted in chaos, denials, accusations, demands for explanation. Throughout it all, Thomas remained perfectly still beside the king, his small hand now firmly grasped in Edmund's larger one. The boy's presence seemed to radiate through the room, drawing fearful glances from those Eleanor had named in her writings. "This is madness, sire," Lord Beaumont shouted above the din. "You would take the word of a dead woman and her charity case against your loyal council?" Thomas stepped forward then, though the king had not prompted him to speak. His voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the chamber's chaos. "On the 17th day of last autumn's moon, you met with Baron Hawkwood and the grain merchants in the Western Tower. You agreed to triple the price of wheat in the northern provinces while claiming blight had reduced the harvest. I carried your messages. I poured your wine. I was invisible to you, but I remembered every word." A deadly silence fell over the assembly. The boy continued, reciting dates, locations, exact phrases spoken by men who had never noticed the child servant in the corner of their meetings. With each detail, faces throughout the chamber grew paler, more desperate. Lord Beaumont's facade of loyalty shattered. "This is an outrage. Some street urchin, coached to repeat lies against noble." "Not just any street urchin," came a new voice from the entrance of the throne room. Lord Athelred stood in the doorway, his clothing as disheveled as the king's, his face bearing fresh bruises. He limped forward, escorted by royal guards. "Tell them who the boy really is, Beaumont. Tell them why the Queen protected him so fiercely." All eyes turned to Thomas, then back to the white-faced chancellor. For the first time, Edmund saw raw fear in Beaumont's expression. "The child is nobody," Beaumont insisted, desperation edging his voice. "A pawn used by the Queen in her sentimental crusades for the peasantry." Edmund studied Thomas's face, seeing now what had eluded him before. The echo of familiar features, the distinctive set of the eyes that recalled ancestors in the royal portraits. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. "Not nobody," the king said quietly, "but someone who, by birth, might have claimed to lands and titles certain nobles have appropriated for themselves. Someone whose very existence threatens carefully constructed inheritance schemes." He turned to the assembled council, his voice rising with authority. "Queen Eleanor did not merely save a child out of charity. She protected the last legitimate heir of the Northern Earldom, lands that have mysteriously fallen under the control of Lord Beaumont's family since the rebellion. Athelred nodded gravely. The boy's father was Lord Nathaniel of Highcrest, falsely branded a traitor during the Northern Campaign. His lands were seized, his family reportedly all killed in the fighting, except for his youngest son, spirited away by the Queen herself. The revelation struck the chamber like a thunderbolt. Many of the nobles present had benefited from the redistribution of Highcrest lands, properties divided among those loyal to the crown after the rebellion. Properties now controlled by the very men Eleanor had identified as conspirators against the common people. "If he grows without protection, the crown will fall into wrong hands," Edmund quoted from his wife's writings. Now he understood the true meaning of her warning. Not that the boy threatened his rule, but that those who feared the child's claim would stop at nothing, even deposing a king, to protect their ill-gotten gains. In that moment, facing the shocked and calculating faces of his court, Edmund made the choice that Eleanor had prepared him for through years of hidden work. He placed his hand formally on Thomas's shoulder and declared, "If he is the secret of my queen, then he is also my legacy." The pronouncement fell like a blade, severing old alliances and creating new possibilities in an instant. Some counselors stepped back in shock, others moved subtly closer to the throne, realigning themselves with the king's unexpected stance. Thomas looked up at Edmund, a genuine smile transforming his solemn face for the first time. The expression struck the king's heart with unexpected force. Here was no political pawn, but a child who had carried burdens no young shoulders should bear, who had waited years for this moment of recognition. But before the king could speak further, the throne room doors burst open once more. A royal guard captain rushed in, breathless with urgency. "Your Majesty, armed men have been discovered in the East Wing, nobles' personal guards gathering near the council chambers. They appear to be preparing for some action against the crown." "O ultimo segredo!" A heartbeat of silence followed the guard's announcement before the throne room erupted into controlled chaos. King Edmund's personal guards immediately moved to secure the entrances while forming a protective ring around their monarch and the boy. Thomas remained remarkably composed, his eyes darting between the faces of the nobles, reading their reactions with the practiced vigilance of one who had learned to survive by observing the powerful. "So this is your answer, Beaumont?" the king asked, his voice dangerously quiet amid the commotion. "Armed insurrection within my own castle walls?" The Lord Chancellor's face had drained of color, but whether from guilt or fear remained unclear. "Your Majesty, I know nothing of this. Perhaps other factions—" "Silence," Edmund commanded, raising a hand that stilled the room instantly. The authority in his bearing transcended his tattered appearance, reminding all present that beneath the grime and torn fabric stood a king whose lineage stretched back 17 generations. "I have heard enough lies today to last a lifetime." He turned to the captain of his guard, a battle-hardened veteran named Sir Reynard, who had served the crown since Edmund's father's time. "How many men can you gather immediately?" 40 within these walls, sire," the knight replied without hesitation. "Another 100 from the barracks beyond the inner gate, though that would take time we may not have." The king nodded grimly. "Secure this chamber first, then send runners to the barracks. I want every loyal man in armor within the quarter hour." As Sir Reynard barked orders to his lieutenants, Edmund turned his attention back to the assembled council. His gaze swept over their faces, searching for any sign of where true loyalty might lie. Some looked genuinely shocked by the unfolding events, while others maintained carefully neutral expressions that revealed nothing of their inner thoughts. Lord Athelred limped closer to the throne, his earlier betrayal seemingly forgotten in the face of this greater threat. "Your Majesty, we must get you and the boy to safety until the situation is contained." Edmund studied his old advisor, weighing years of trusted counsel against the recent deception in the catacombs. "And where would you suggest, Lord Athelred? More hidden passages? Another trap?" "The Queen's chambers," Athelred replied without hesitation. "They remain sealed as you ordered after her death. Few know of the reinforced doors installed during the border wars. You could withstand a siege there if necessary." Thomas tugged gently at the king's sleeve. When Edmund bent closer, the boy whispered, "He speaks truth now. She showed me the hidden panel behind her tapestry, iron-bound oak beneath. The king straightened, decision made. Sir Reynard, clear a path to the queen's wing. Lord Athelred, you will accompany us, where I can keep my eye upon you. As the guards formed a phalanx around them, Edmund addressed the remaining council members. Let it be known throughout the castle, those who stand with their rightful king will be remembered with honor. Those who side with traitors will share their fate. The journey through the castle corridors was tense, each intersection approached with drawn swords and careful reconnaissance. Twice they were forced to divert their route as reports came of armed men gathering ahead. The atmosphere throughout the palace had transformed. Servants flattened themselves against walls as the royal party passed, while distant shouts and the occasional clash of steel echoed from other wings. Throughout it all, Thomas kept pace beside the king, his small hand now firmly gripped in Edmund's larger one. The boy moved with surprising steadiness, showing none of the fear one might expect from a child caught in the midst of what was quickly becoming open rebellion. You've seen conflict before, Edmund observed quietly as they hurried down a lesser-used corridor. Thomas nodded. During the Northern Campaign, and after, when she first took me away. The simple words carried implications that twisted in Edmund's chest. What horrors had this child witnessed during the rebellion he had so efficiently crushed? What suffering had his royal decrees, signed from the comfort of command tents far from the fighting, inflicted upon the innocent? The Queen's secret work took on new meaning with each passing moment. They reached Eleanor's chambers without direct confrontation, though the sounds of fighting grew louder from the direction of the main hall. Sir Reynard positioned guards at every approach, while Athelred directed them to the hidden reinforcements Thomas had confirmed. Once inside, with the heavy doors secured, a strange calm descended over their small group. The Queen's rooms remained exactly as she had left them, her personal items untouched, her favorite books still arranged on shelves, her embroidery frame positioned near the window where the light was best. Edmund had ordered nothing disturbed after her death, and in the years since, he had rarely entered this space that contained so many memories. Thomas moved through the chambers with the ease of familiarity, trailing his fingers over furnishings as if greeting old friends. She would bring me here sometimes, he explained, seeing the king's questioning look. When the castle slept, she said I should know beautiful things too, not just shadows and hiding places. The innocent comment struck Edmund with unexpected force. While he had ruled from the throne room and council chambers, Eleanor had created this parallel world, teaching a hidden child about beauty and dignity, while simultaneously documenting the corruption that threatened the realm. How blind he had been to her true strength. Lord Athelred cleared his throat, breaking the moment of reflection. Your Majesty, we must consider our next move carefully. Beaumont controls significant forces, and several of the northern barons will likely side with him now that their schemes are exposed. You knew of these schemes all along, Edmund said, studying his advisor's battered face. Yet you played both sides of this game. Why? The old man sank heavily into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 60-some years. I served your father before you, sire. I watched him struggle with the same challenges, balancing the crown's power against the ambitions of noble houses, trying to protect common folk without triggering open rebellion from their lords. He gestured toward Thomas. When the Queen first revealed to me what she had done, saving this child when all his family were condemned as traitors, I thought her foolish, dangerously sentimental. But over time, I saw the wisdom in her actions. Yet you led us into a trap in the catacombs, Edmund reminded him sharply. I sought to protect you both from precisely what is happening now, Athelred countered. Had you emerged directly into the castle with the boy at your side, Beaumont's men would have struck immediately, with no warning. I needed time to alert those still loyal to the crown, to position guards who would stand with you rather than the conspirators. Before Edmund could respond, Sir Reynard returned from conferring with his men in the corridor. The situation worsens, Your Majesty. The traitors have secured the main gates and armory. They've sent riders to nearby estates, presumably to summon reinforcements. The king's expression hardened. This was no longer a matter of court intrigue, but open insurrection. And our loyal forces? Holding the inner ward and your personal wing, sire. The common folk in the Lower Bailey are barricading themselves in. They've heard rumors of what's happening and fear reprisals from Beaumont's men. Thomas, who had been quietly exploring the chamber, suddenly spoke up. The people will fight for you if you fight for them. All eyes turned to the boy, who stood beside Eleanor's writing desk with unnerving composure. What do you mean, child? Edmund asked. She said the nobles fear the common people more than they fear the crown. That's why they keep them hungry and divided. Thomas traced a pattern on the wooden desk, seemingly gathering his thoughts. But she showed me how many there are. In the fields, the workshops, the markets. If they stood together. The king exchanged glances with Athelred, seeing the same realization dawn in his advisor's eyes. Throughout history, nobles had maintained their power by ensuring the common folk remained fragmented, focused on day-to-day survival rather than collective action. Eleanor had understood this fundamental truth, had documented it in her secret work with the monasteries. Sir Reynard, Edmund said slowly, send messengers to the town. Tell the guild masters and village elders that their king stands against those who have kept grain prices artificially high, who have diverted repair funds meant for the bridges and wells, who have lined their pockets while children starve. The knight hesitated only briefly before nodding. It shall be done, sire. As Reynard departed, Athelred rose painfully to his feet. A dangerous gambit, your majesty. If you invite the common folk into this struggle, the nobles will never forget, nor forgive. They have already chosen their path, Edmund replied, gesturing to the sounds of fighting that occasionally penetrated even the thick walls of the queen's chambers. Now I must choose mine. He knelt before Thomas, bringing himself level with the boy's serious eyes. The final words of the queen's letter. Protect him as if he were your own. What did she mean by this? Not just physical safety, I think. Thomas met his gaze without wavering. She said I would be your conscience when hers was silenced, that I would remind you of what cannot be seen from thrones. The king felt something shift within him, not just understanding, but transformation. Eleanor had not simply saved a child out of compassion. She had preserved a living bridge between crown and commons, a voice that could speak for those never heard in royal councils. Rising to his full height, Edmund turned to the assembled group, his battered advisor, his loyal guards, and the small boy who carried his wife's final legacy. We will not hide behind these walls while traitors claim my throne, he declared. I will face them openly, with the truth as my shield and justice as my sword. He extended his hand to Thomas. The queen's last wish shall be honored. From this day forward, you stand under my personal protection, not as a ward of charity, but as the living embodiment of Eleanor's vision for this realm. The boy took the king's hand without hesitation. In that moment of connection, Edmund felt his wife's presence more strongly than at any time since her death, not as a ghost or memory, but as a guiding principle that transcended physical absence. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the queen's chambers, Thomas paused at the threshold. There's one more thing she wanted you to know, he said quietly. Something she never wrote down, even in her secret diary. Edmund waited, sensing the weight of whatever final revelation was coming. She said that true legacy isn't found in crowns or castles, Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. It's in the promises we keep even when no one is watching. The mercy we show when power would make cruelty easier. The love that survives beyond death. The king felt tears threaten, not of grief now, but of understanding and resolve. Eleanor had given him not just a child to protect, but a purpose that would define the remainder of his reign. In saving Thomas, she had also perhaps saved him. With the boy at his side, King Edmund stepped forward to face whatever awaited beyond the door. No longer just a monarch defending his crown, but a man honoring the deepest wish of the woman he had loved, rediscovering the kingdom through her eyes and finding it both more broken and more precious than he had ever realized. In that moment, the final truth became clear. The greatest gift Eleanor had left was not the exposure of conspirators, or even the protection of an innocent child, but the chance for a king to become the ruler his people truly needed, one who saw value in even the smallest, most overlooked subjects of his realm. As King Edmund and Thomas emerged from the shadow of secrecy into the light of truth, they forever changed the course of a kingdom. Their story reminds us that true power lies not in crowns or castles, but in the courage to see beyond our comfortable illusions. What would you do if faced with such a choice? Would you cling to the safety of ignorance, or would you, like Edmund, have the strength to embrace a painful truth that could transform not just your life, but the lives of countless others? Queen Eleanor's final gift wasn't the revelation of conspiracies or even the child she saved. It was the chance for redemption, the opportunity to bridge the gap between power and compassion. In our own lives, we too are presented with moments that define us, times when we must decide whether to look away from suffering or to stand as witnesses and agents of change. The most profound legacy we leave behind isn't written in history books or carved in stone, but lives on in the hearts we've touched and the lives we've changed. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Each tale we tell is a thread in the tapestry of human experience, connecting us across time and circumstance. Remember, the most powerful stories are those that challenge us to see the world through different eyes, and perhaps, like King Edmund, to discover that our greatest strength lies in what we once perceived as our vulnerability.